Hey, everybody, welcome back to You Are What You Love. I'm your host, Marissa Tandon, and today my guest is a colleague and friend of mine in the audio drama space. Her name is Sarah Shachat. She is a producer, a writer, and sort of everything under the sun. So please welcome Sarah to the show.
Oh my gosh, Marissa, thank you so much for having me. And thank you for running such a wonderful show. I'm getting to listen to all my friends talk about their fandoms, and it's amazing.
I know it's so funny. When I started it, I was like, I guess this is just a nice little excuse for me to hang out with friends, colleagues, and people I've always wanted to message on the internet and ask them to hang out with me on Zoom for 2 hours.
I feel like that is the secret of all podcasts, is that they are just excuses for us to hang out with cool people.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't know anybody who has, I mean, I guess there's like cool investigative journalism podcasts, but like at the same time I'm like, one of you must be wanting to hang out with someone, right?
Yes.
Someone on the group.
I have a feeling they want to hang out with each other and solve mysteries, but they're
Yeah.
still hanging out to be had.
Yeah, I feel like it's not about the mystery. It's about the people we met along the way of solving the crime.
Exactly. Exactly. We should
Well,
solve
speaking
crimes.
Oh my god, maybe we should solve crimes. Well, speaking of, groups hanging out on a larger mission,
Mm.
what are we talking about today? What is the thing that changed who you are as a person?
Oh man, so we are talking about the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, specifically The Lord of the Rings, where just lots of lads are hanging out, hiking across the continent. It's great.
I love that as a description if you've never seen Lord of the Rings. Actually, it's just a bunch of lads hiking across the continent.
A lot of walking.
There is a lot of walking. Well, I think Lord of the Rings is, like, such an iconic piece of work that so many people probably have a connection to, even if that connection is, "Ooh, those movies are really long and I don't wanna watch them." But I feel like it's such a cultural touch point that everyone knows to some degree.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I had a response that I'm realizing now so many other people had at the time. I was kind of the nerd of the nerds at the school I was going to, and I thought you know, no one likes Lord of the Rings. Never mind that they've made all these movies and won all those Oscars. No one likes them.
Yeah.
It's just me. I'm special. And the joy of getting older and not being a teenager anymore.
In
So I'm like,
realizing you're not alone.
yeah, no, lots of us like it. It's great.
Yeah. Well, I love, like, the idea that now, as an adult, you can kind of look around you and realize that there was this huge fandom or huge, like, obsession with it. I think with sometimes with stuff that goes that big, people don't necessarily use the word fandom. Like,
Right.
they're
It's
like,
just
"Oh, yeah, I
culture.
love Lord of the Rings." Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just culture, right? Um, so I'm curious though, like, obviously now you know that there are so many people, but when did you discover Lord of the Rings, like, yourself?
I for the films I watched the trailers in theaters like everybody else.
Mm. Yeah.
And I was kind of at an age where I was slightly too young for the books. I'd read The Hobbit in either 3rd or 4th grade and really loved it, and loved even the poems and the rhymes and the riddles. I was like, "Yes, get about that. Give me more. More maps, please." Um
I love a map in a book.
Love a map. And I then tried to read Fellowship, and dropped off around the Old Forest like a lot of people
In the
do.
4th grade?
In the 4th grade. It was bad. Or
Okay.
maybe I was in 5th grade at that point, but, still elementary school.
Yeah.
Still, reading a lot of Redwall,
Yeah.
which love Redwall too, but it's less complicated. So, eventually, I couldn't quite get through the books, wanted to, know the story before the movies came out, so I discovered, or my parents discovered for me, it's either 1980 or 1983, like, early '80s, BBC live cast edition of The Lord of the Rings, with Ian Holm playing Frodo, weirdly, and Bill Nighy as Sam. That's fun. Um
Wait, so you were basically like, "I can't get through Fellowship of the Ring, but I as a book, but you listened to, like a full cast audio drama, basically?"
Yes, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, this is another thing I'm like, "How did I end up in audio drama?" It's so random, but I was listening to a lot of tapes as a small child.
How cool.
Yeah.
So what did you think of the audio drama? How did
I
that hook
I
you?
loved it. That
Yeah.
hooked me. That was what I needed. Um, and I fell in love with the world. I fell in love with these characters, and I think I fell in love with, like, also the spirit of it, this sort of very sincere, epic adventure that has this sort of arch romantic sadness to it as
Mm.
well. Like, I loved the fact that the elves were all gonna peace. I was like, "Oh my god, this is so sad, it's please give me more." Um, um, so yeah, and then the movies came out, and that's when the obsession started. I was just gone. At that point, I was just on the onering.net at all times, always.
The one ring dot net, I love it.
They're still
So
around.
still kicking.
Yeah.
So, you started with The Hobbit. Did you have kind of like a connection to fantasy before The Hobbit? Like, were you a big maps and book girl at this
I
point?
was, yeah,
Yeah?
although, at the I think I sort of entered it in through, The Golden Compass was probably the
Mm,
first fantasy-ish, fantasy adjacent, book that I read, and then, as I mentioned, the Redwall books I think are solidly in the fantasy genre, and more high fantasy,
mm,
and I loved those. So I was already in,
yeah.
but then you read the OG, and I mean, come on. Every description of smog is just metal as fuck. It's la like, it's incredible. And, yeah, I just loved it. And I gravitated towards more escapist stuff, I think,
Mm,
um, fantasy, sci-fi, and historical fiction too, more than, like, I think the only, like, sort of realistic kids books I loved were, like, the Egypt Club and stuff where, like, people could go back in time or there was some sort of fantastic element
mhm.
to it when it was just like, "Here's a bunch of kids, and they're having adventures and avoiding the adults in their life." I'm like, "Why? What are we doing here?
Yeah.
I'm just a kid, and I can do that in my normal life. Why am I reading it?"
I'm just a kid and life is a nightmare is what I was expecting you to say. You were like, "I'm just a kid and I can do that."
Oh, man,
Different
if I
take.
were cooler, I would've gone there, but no.
No. Yeah.
Just yeah, so, and it was interesting, I actually remember very vividly, and the joke's on me because this person who made a comment when we were reading The Hobbit, like, in a little book group, in
Mhm.
4th grade, was just, like, around the riddles between Bilbo and Gollum was like, "I just don't think it's very realistic, this book." And I was like, but they're
Realistic. It's a
but they're
Hobbit.
it we're in Middle Earth. There are
Right.
different rules, chill out." Joke's on me, like, it incredibly smart, now a doctor,
Mm.
giving back to humanity. I'm just still obsessed with these books. So, she might be right. But that was like I remember that as a moment of, like, how can you not people have different tastes than I do.
Mm.
I'm just not like, people don't like the same thing? What?
Yeah. So when you I know that the life was a nightmare, it was a joke, but, like, how were you at in 3rd and 4th grade when this kind of world opened up for you in this escapism of fantasy?
Yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of folks, I needed a world to open up because I didn't quite know what to do with the world I was in.
Mm.
Which is not to say that there was anything particularly angsty going on, at that point in my life. I had a really great childhood, and lovely parents, but I wasn't like I was just really socially awkward,
Yeah.
and I was better with adults than I was with people my own age, in part because, like, I just, like, didn't vibe with a lot of '90s culture, like, I got into Spice Girls a little bit,
Okay.
but mostly to please, like, the next door neighbor that I hung out with. Like, there was a little bit of NSYNC happening, but
Okay.
other than that,
Justin Timberlake and his macaroni hair didn't get you? You weren't
no,
you
not quite, not quite. I'm trying to think, I think, like, I think I was more I was Backstreet Boys, Joey a little bit, but
Okay.
But yeah, no, JT did not get me when I was young.
You
But yeah,
didn't
so it
fall
was
into the trap.
yeah, it was a way for me to sort of feel free to exercise, like, the fullness of my mind and imagination,
Mm,
because, there's things that are just in the water and I didn't have words for at the time, but can now identify of, like, I was a little scared to be too smart,
mm.
and I was.
Did you feel like you were, like, not challenged at school? Like, you were I think at that age, you don't necessarily realize that that's what it is, but looking back on
Yeah.
it, you're too smart for the environment you're in?
A little bit, and it's not that I yeah, no, I think that's fair. Um, I had an incredible 3rd and 4th grade teacher who was exposing us to all like, we read the Ramayana, like, it was
Mm,
great. We did, like, a lot of things that I don't think, I would have encountered even in college otherwise. A lot of my favorite books as a kid I read, those years, but it wasn't enough. I was just, like, hungry and insatiable and reading at my desk when people were trying to teach me math, and I was like, "Please stop doing this. This is not relevant to my life." Um, and it's not.
it's true.
I have computers and I have a computer in my phone that will do the
Sarah,
math for
I don't
me.
know what to tell you, but you use math every day.
It's true. I was putting together a production schedule yesterday, and you do absolutely use math.
Yeah, I know, it's like it's the worst thing. They're like, "You're gonna use
Yeah.
this every day of your life." Calculus? I don't know about that, but math? Sure.
Math, yes.
Yeah.
But I had no time for it, and I think it was just, like, for better and for worse, I kind of knew very early how much I loved storytelling.
Mm,
I don't think at that point I was like, "I'm gonna be a writer."
yeah.
I think that came later, but, like, I understood what I loved, and wanted to do that. I was like, "Why are we
Mhm.
wasting time with other things?"
Mm,
The Lord of the Rings particularly was, like, the perfect intersection of all of my interests of reading, history, language, culture, like, all sorts of things, which again, I wouldn't have been able to know when I
right.
was, like, 9 or whatever, but yeah,
Yeah, I love the idea of nine-year-old you being like, "Actually, this book is the exact intersection that's saving me from being too smart around my peers." So,
exactly.
I'm so glad I found it.
Yeah,
Very, like, Sherlockian of you.
just a little bit precocious, just a little bit.
Yeah. Just not to the point that no one wanted to speak to you ever again, but you were a little snappy, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the way it always is, born out of fear.
Mm,
Like, I was terrified of
yeah.
other kids, most of them. I would, like, get 1 or 2 friends where I was like, "Okay, you're a safe person. We can hang
Yeah.
out."
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
I think something that's interesting about that, though, I like what you said about, like, nothing particularly angsty was going on. Like, you have loving parents, you weren't going through some sort of trauma, and I think a lot of times people assume that a love for something that escapist or that there is this constant connection to escapism and something terrible happening that you need to escape from, but I kinda like what you're describing, which is just sort of like the horror of being that age, which doesn't necessarily mean that something's happening to you. It just means that that is such a transitional point in life where people become who they are, and that fear can be traumatic enough to need to escape.
Yeah, and I think that again, couldn't have articulated it at the time, but there is something to, like, there's this innate understanding I think a lot of, people who end up in the arts have of just,
Yeah.
like, "I don't fit. Why don't I fit? Where can I fit?" Um, and the answer was in Hobbiton for me.
Hmm. Were you one thing I'm curious about too is, like, were you in sort of a town that you had people to choose from, or were you in a small space where it's like, "I don't fit," and there's only, like, 2 options of where to fit?
So I grew up in New Orleans, which is a wonderful city, that I don't live in, now. Now that I have the choice, I'm not there. Um, and I went to I it was this again, like a great education, I don't fault them. This very, very tiny elementary school, where there were, like, maybe 50 kids per class, like,
Mm.
maybe. It was a K through 12, and so there were, like, 40 of us by the end of it, um, although I ended up going to, like, 2 schools in high school, so that's a little bit more complicated. But yeah, there wasn't a lot of choice. I was kind of thrown in with, the kids that we ended up, like, in a carpool with a lot.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I definitely had friends, growing up, but there wasn't a lot of choice,
Mm.
for sure, and for whatever reason, like, I wasn't doing any extracurriculars where, I made deep friendships because again, like, I was just awkward.
Yeah.
It was just hard for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's fair. Yeah, I think I always think about, like, the friends that you make as a kid and looking back on it, whether you were sort of forcing yourself into the box that fit the best rather than, like,
Yeah,
the actual box
that you
that
would
you wanted to be
choose.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
still know a couple of those guys, now, which is fascinating. Like, I was just on the phone with a buddy of mine from middle school who now has 2 kids,
Oh, wow.
and there is something very cool about, as an adult, knowing people who knew you back when you were your most gremlin-like, um, just, like, the weirdest that you would ever be in public, they saw it.
Yeah. Oh,
Um
yeah.
Uh, but I don't have a lot of those people, and I'm not necessarily, like, super tight with the ones that
Yeah.
I do have. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think you're right, though. There is something about that, like, gremlin era of your life and
Yeah,
keeping someone around who bore witness, I suppose.
exactly. Siblings are good for that too, but they are
Oh,
with you
yeah.
way too much as well.
Yeah, no, it's like a slightly different energy of, like, you
Yeah,
saw this person for 8 hours a day, and that was, like, the worst version of yourself as you were coming together, and they're still like,
exactly.
"Yeah, like, we should have a phone call. Let's still chat."
"Let's hang out." Yeah.
Yeah.
"Let me know when
Something
you're in town."
something nice about that, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, cool. So you it sounds like Bilbo kinda grabs you in 3rd or 4th grade. I also find it interesting that it's, like, assigned reading that you had to do. Um,
It was, yeah.
yeah. So you, like, didn't pick it off a shelf. It was sort of like you showed up and then you were like,
I was
"No,
just
this is
handed the
it."
book. It was just
Yeah.
like, "Hello, you've just finished the K. Here's the
Okay.
Hobbit." Yeah.
Interesting. And so I think you mentioned one person kind of being like, "This is dumb and not realistic," which I think is hilarious to
Yeah.
say. Like, I know she ended up turning out quite smart, but I think there's something very funny about picking up a fantasy book and in group discussion calling it unrealistic. Um
Enough that I've remembered it for the rest of my
Yeah.
life. Yeah.
Did anyone else in class, like, hook onto it the same way you did? Was anyone else like, "This is amazing"?
I don't remember, and the way they did assigned reading was very cool, is there were, like, maybe 12 of us in 12 or 15 of us in the class, and they would break us into, like, groups of 3 or 4 to do reading discussions, so it wasn't like the whole class doing it all together. It was just like a group of us, would all be reading a book at the same time, and the teachers would rotate. Probably that made lesson planning easier for them. 'Cause they had 3 books going, and then it would take, like, a whole semester to get everybody
Get
through
all the way
them.
through.
Yeah. So I don't remember if there was anyone else who was really into it. I know I was into it the most.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we've kinda tracked you read it in class, tried to move on to kind of the more intense versions of it, and then, interestingly enough, ended up getting through it with a radio drama, which I think
Yeah.
is a really cool little fact, like, based off of where you end up
I
later in
know.
life.
Who could have
Was
predicted this?
Who could have known?
Yeah.
Was there, like, a moment in something that got you from, "I like this book and I like this Hobbit," to, "This is the best thing that's ever happened to me?" Like, something that hooked you in?
I mean, probably the movies. Um, Probably seeing the movies, and seeing, that world so fully realized, wonderfully realized. Um, the Howard Shore score did something to my brain, and it's never been the same. You know, I was never I wasn't quite an Orly girl, but Viggo Mortensen, Chef's Kiss.
No one can see the hand to the air that I'm doing right now, but it's a lot for me. What a
Yeah,
man.
yeah, yeah. No, that was formative, as they say.
Was
Um, and then I would say, like, because there was such a long wait until, like, the next one of these, and Fellowship left theaters, and then I had to wait for the DVDs too, like, there was,
Mm,
this long period of months where there was just, like, no Lord of the Rings for me to consume
mhm.
anymore. I was like, "Well, I'm reading these goddamn books, and I'm I'm finding people on the internet who like this thing too." Uh, and so I think diving into the fandom in sort of the waiting period for Two Towers, 1 was really great and sort of got me more immersed in the world because there were people who were far more, immersed than I was.
Yeah.
And wait, what is the Silmarillion? There are books, there are more?
Mm,
There's more stuff? So, like, a lot of discovery that way and also, then getting the validation and sort of the serotonin spike of other people who loved this as much as I did,
yeah.
if not more. Yeah.
So I love kind of when people's fandom journey or like their doorway into fandom is from this I need more of this
Mhm.
thing, please. And finding other people who feel exactly the same way, which is what it sounds like your kind of doorway in was.
Absolutely. And there was, this forum, it's the I don't know how active it is anymore, it still exists. I double checked it this morning to see if the domain was still there. They are. It's called the Barrow Downs,
Mhm.
and it was, like, my first sort of online forum experience because I think at that point, we had a computer in the house and, like, I was considered enough of a person that I could be on it by myself for a few hours, and it wasn't I could go kinda wherever, it didn't need to be Yahoo Kids.
Mm,
Shout
like
out
not
to all
supervised.
yeah, all my middle millennials who know those games.
I was gonna say I
On
don't know what a Yahoo Kid is,
it
but
was Yahoo it was a website that was, like, specifically, and there were, like, math games and, like, crossword puzzle
oh, I
stuff.
see. Yeah.
Yeah, that, like it was, like, marketed in the Yahoo AOL heyday of, like, this is a safe site for kids to be on.
Got it. Got it.
But yeah, I could go other places now. Um, and they had, like, a chapter by chapter read along thread and things, and so
Mhm.
I was able to was then able to get through the trilogy,
Yeah.
um, and dive into, like, all of the conversations that people were having about the books and the film, and there were suddenly I went from, "There's nothing, what do I do with this level of intensity in my tiny body?" to, "There's more than I could possibly consume, um, forever. This is great."
Forever. Did you, like, find yourself worried about spoilers at all? Like, I know for me, when I found The Lord of the Rings, like, all the movies were out, and I watched the movies
Uh-huh.
first, and it sort of, like, was already at that point where if you were shocked by a spoiler, it's like, "Girl, the books have been around for 100 years. Like, it's
Yeah,
um
I don't even remember being worried about like, I think I clocked that spoilers were a thing slightly
yeah,
later.
okay. You were more, like, encyclopedic almost of,
Yeah,
"Tell me
it was
everything."
just yeah. It wasn't like I need to be have in fact, it was the reverse because 'cause I'm at this point in my life, I think, now I'm in middle school, now incredibly pretentious. Um, the pretension level has spiked much higher, and I'm like, "I don't wanna see a movie if I haven't read the book."
Classic era of your life, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. The worst reinforcement of, like, "Oh, I've read Tolkien, now I can read Dickens." Like, starting to go through all of, like, the English literary canon, and just feeling more and more superior with each one.
Yeah.
There's is it is a fun, awkward bad time.
That's so funny. No, yeah, I think every book nerd, if you talk to them at a certain point, had that phase where it was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I could never see the movie if I haven't read the book." Like,
Yeah.
it is that energy, and there's nothing wrong with that mentality, like, I had that mentality for so long, um, but it is always I think once you pinpoint what part of your life you make a big deal out of it, not necessarily, like, that
Yes.
you feel that way, but just that you make a very big soapboxy deal out of it.
Is fascinating. I remember, I had, like, a slightly unconventional high school experience where I was still going to the school I had been going to,
Mhm.
but I also started going to NOCA, the New Orleans Center for Creative Arts,
Okay.
and their creative writing program, and now it is a full-time school. You can just, like, apply and, like, move there for high school. When I was there, they had half-day programs, so you would go get your state requirements out of the way wherever you would normally go to school, and then go for half the day to NOCA and do, like, your artistic discipline, and there's lots of, like, really challenging and, fascinating things that they do. They do lots of jazz. Trombone Shorty came out of there. They have a culinary school. They do, dance and all sorts of things, and then there's, like, a tiny creative writing program in the corner, and that's where I was.
So you went to, like, half day fame. Um,
Exactly, a little bit. And I remember, like, very early on because at this point, I was just a huge, giant fantasy nerd reading, like, Dragonlance and, like, all sorts. It wasn't just Tolkien, and I had sort of, like, a chip on my shoulder about fantasy not getting the respect that it deserved,
mm,
and I'm gonna have to read, like, John Cheever? What the fuck? Um,
yeah.
I remember my instructor saying, like, "Don't" basically, I don't remember the exact phrasing, but it was something to the effect of, "These stories are great, you shouldn't have your self-worth wrapped up in them."
Interesting.
Yeah, and it was, like, the first time I'm like, "There's a reason that I am so militant about reading the book before I see the movie. It's because I need to feel superior to
Mm,
other people because otherwise I would be very sad about where I stand in the social hierarchy of high school and middle school and things.
yeah.
Um, so it was and he specifically said about Lord of the Rings, it was like, "It's a good book, it's a horrible obsession." I was like I was not ready to hear that at age 14. I was like, "Fuck you."
Yeah.
I'm still a little bit like,
As
"Fuck
you
you."
yeah, as you tell that story, I'm feeling a little fucky, like, I wanna write a letter.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't think he's there anymore. But it was not what I was ready to hear, but kind of I needed to hear maybe that harsh version so I could get to the place of just, like, more chill about everything, you know?
Yeah. But did you feel like I don't know, it's like an authority figure sort of crushing something that matters to you in a really deep way, like, and sort of saying be less enthusiastic about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was like, "Well, I'll prove it."
Mm,
Um, I'm gonna turn in, like, a really, um floridly written, um, like, I don't know that I put magic in it, but it was about, like, fighter dudes, fighting a war. I was just like, "Read this."
yeah, I'll
Um,
show you.
I'll show you. So it was a little bit of that, and, it I think there is something that I was doing in reverse of, like, my thing is good, and your things that you think are good are actually not as good as my thing.
Mm,
Um, and being willing to chill out and be like, "No, Raymond Carver is great.
yeah,
Like, please give me more Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Yes,
mhm,
please. All of these Arab poets of the 20th century, I want to read them."
yeah,
Um, and just being open and willing and not like you liking a thing. There is like that very teenage thing of like, if I like a thing, it has to be at the expense of other things.
mm. Yeah, this is the only thing as
This is the
opposed
only
to
thing. Yeah,
yeah. So, I
exactly.
think I guess I don't like how he did it, but I like that
Yeah,
you were
you don't
able
have to
to
give him a
diversify.
pass, but, like,
Yeah,
I like what happened because of
out
that.
of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like, the diversification of your interests, I
Exactly, of
think,
my
is
tastes.
valuable. Yeah, I guess,
Very, very
whatever.
good and an important thing to have happened.
I just think he coulda said it differently
Oh,
or,
yeah.
like, proved it to you, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
for sure.
yeah, but so when you're kind of going through the movie releases,
Mhm.
something I realized I don't even know is I think the first time I watched Lord of the Rings, it was the extended editions. Was the
Yeah.
release of the extended editions, like, a big difference? Were the
A
movies the
hu
theatrical?
It's not it's interesting. I'm actually looking at this now, because we're coming up on the 20-year anniversary of the extended editions or the
Oh,
extended
wow.
edition for Fellowship coming out. Um, and the films change. The extended editions, do sort of subtle things to the pacing and, there are more scenes. I think each film's extended edition is a little bit, different
Mhm,
and a little bit more or less successful. I think they're successful to varying degrees. Uh, but at the time, um, I remember just being hugely excited that I had more material and also all of the which I wish we still did this, like, commentary tracks and all of
yeah.
the, like, lovingly documented behind the scenes stuff, which included, I remember on the first disc of they call them the appendices because there are appendices in The Lord of the Rings.
Oh, that's
The
funny.
yeah, the bonus material, like, there's, like, an hour-long conversation with, like, Tolkien scholars and Christopher Lee, who played Saruman, who was a big Tolkien nerd, of just, like, talking about the adaptation process. So it wasn't
Mhm,
just like, "Here's how we made the armor." Um, it was just at the look into the filmmaking was as expansive as the story, and I
mhm,
think that, looking back, one of the things that sort of got me interested in filmmaking, and what I knew about filmmaking for a long time was mostly based off what's in those extended editions.
yeah. I love I think the bonus content of DVDs, like, of that world that we just I don't know, maybe they're still making the content and we just can't access it? I don't but I don't think they really are
They're
in the
they're
same
they're
way.
not really. No, I
Yeah,
mean, if you get, like, Criterion Blu-rays, you get them sometimes.
yeah.
But it's not part of the culture of, like, the popular culture in the way that it was, and I think it should be. I think, the Russo brothers should have to account for themselves in a commentary track on those
Oh,
Avengers movies.
oh, oh, wouldn't we all love to see it?
I know.
Well, it's funny that you bring up the Russo brothers and the Avengers specifically because when you talk about, like, DVD extras that, like, changed something in you and
Mhm.
really hooked you. For me, it's the Iron Man franchise when they show, how they did the suit and, like, how they actually built everything out and the practical effects that they used in that first movie. And then as you go through, Robert Downey Jr. got more uninterested in wearing the whole suit. So, like, the first movie, he wears the entire suit, and then,
Yeah.
like, slowly but surely, he's like, "I'll wear just the top half. I'll wear just the breastplate."
Can I just be in a green shirt and you
Yes, and
put the
you
suit
could do it
on
later, right?
later?
It's, like, slowly
Yeah.
but surely, they're like, "It works, so spend more money." But I remember watching the making of the suit for the first one and being
Oh,
like,
wow.
"Man, they turned him into a real superhero." Because you watch it and you're like, "Oh, okay, yeah, like, sure, he's wearing, like, green screen, they did it." And then you watch the DVD extras and you're like, "No, they built the suit,"
They
which
did
makes
it.
it feel so much more real and, like, genuine.
There's something really special about, like, seeing that level of craftsmanship. It makes the story more real somehow.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I mean, there's that in spades all over The Lord of the Rings. I am contractually obligated as a fan to mention the, like, moment in Two Towers where, like, Aragorn kicks a helmet and, like, Viggo broke his toe,
Oh, yes.
on set.
Yeah,
And they kept that shot in the movie. So it's like knowing stuff like that.
yeah.
Um,
Aren't the Lord of the Rings, the movies, the movie that Viggo, like, adopted his horse from that
yes.
movie?
Yes, he became such good friends with his horse that he bought the horse.
I don't know why I said adopted, like, he was like he's an actor. The horse is an actor. He was doing fine for himself.
It's a weird relationship where it's, like, it's not a person, but also, like, you have this connect I don't know. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, no, he was like, "I will not be parted from this horse."
Oh, I yeah, I think that's one of my favorite little behind the
Yeah.
scenes, stories of, like, can you imagine just being you're like, "No, this horse and I,
We've
we
been through
belong
some
together."
shit. Yeah. We belong together.
3 wars. Like,
I mean,
this is
yeah.
us, literally,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's I yeah, I think there's something to what you're saying, like, especially, a fandom and a trilogy of movies that has endured for so long,
Yeah.
um, and, like, there being there's so much of it and so many little facts that you can obsess over, and I think we still do that now, but like you said, even just from the beginning of, like, the MCU to where we're at the MCU now, there is so much less being given to you that the obsession now feels more of, like, well, if I go frame by frame and go by industry news, I can figure out what was going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's weird, and I think, like, it's interesting to contrast, like, the interest, in the original trilogy as it was being made with, like, franchise movies now. Like, people are fascinated by slightly different things,
Mm,
both because of what the studios are willing to give, and also just because of, like, how internet culture has moved and changed since
yeah.
2001, um, which is wild to think about.
Yeah, well, so you talked about, the Burrow Down or the Barrow Downs, excuse me,
Yeah.
and, like, the fan website and that energy. Was that kind of fan fiction? Was that fan analysis? Was that, kind of book to
Yeah, it
movie?
was
What was
all of
going
those
on?
things, which was nice. I started doing, like, fan RP like, forum I don't know the term for it, but, like, text role playing where, like, a bunch of
Mm,
people are in a party and, like, someone writes a post and then the next person pushes the story forward, and it's, like, sort of, exquisite corpsing
okay.
a a story, but everyone's playing a different character. So that I did a lot of that, and still in my working relationships, it's a little bit of like, "Okay, I'm gonna write this bit, and then you'll write that bit, and then you'll give it back
Yeah,
to me, and, like, we'll write the next." Like, it's wild to me now that I ever wanted to be, like, a novelist because I find collaborative storytelling just so rewarding, and it was how, like, I started the discipline of actually writing.
yeah,
Yeah, and so I did a lot of that, and I read a fair bit of fan fiction. There were different sites. This was before AO3,
yes,
which
pre-AO3.
yeah,
We're, like, fanfiction.net era and, like, LiveJournal
fanfiction.net
maybe?
era, a lot of LiveJournal. There was, like, specifically a Lord of the Rings fanfic site called Henethanun,
Mm,
that I was at, and did more reading than writing of, like, traditional fanfic,
yeah,
but read a lot and then, yeah, a fair amount of, like, fan analysis of the books, and also as the movies were coming out, I was getting older and able to start reading some of the more sort of lore-based Tolkien stuff, like the Silmarillion, the Lays of Beleriand, and, the histories of Middle-earth and things like that.
mhm. I love this idea that kind of, like, your first experience with fan writing comes out of this collaborative experience, and it also sounds kind of like almost a live collaboration, like like, not improv, but something of that level where you are instantly responding to people.
Yeah, where it's interesting because the it it's not quite improv. It's not like we're gonna sit down for the next 6 hours and bang this out. It sort of
Yeah.
could happen over months, and someone could post and then kind of fall off, and you kinda have to carry that character because you don't know where the person went. Sometimes that was me. Sometimes
Yeah.
I was like, "I have an exam. I'm sorry. I'm not gonna post for, like, the next 4 weeks."
Yeah. And they were like,
Um,
"Well, she went off to pick berries in the corner."
yeah, she's just hanging out there. She's, in the back of the group giving a thumbs up. Yeah, so it's a very interesting, dynamic, but, like, there is that sort of rewarding spontaneity of, I don't know what another person is gonna do, and then I read that, and it gets me excited to think about how the story is gonna move forward.
Yeah. And that's kind of happening in this space where you're feeling like you don't necessarily fit in sort of the real world, so to speak,
Yeah.
that you're in. But it almost sounds like there's something very, I think a lot of people that I've talked to about, like fan fiction in that era was them writing something, posting it, and getting people's responses from their own
Mhm.
work. Whereas it sounds like your experience was more being a part of like a party, like you said, a community and a group of people that are sort of saying together we can make something.
Yes. It's much closer to D&D than it is to fan
Mm,
fiction,
yeah.
this thing. And yeah, I did that all through middle school, through a chunk of high school, and then kind of fell off, the fandom train for a little bit because I was trying to get into college and things. Um,
Sure.
but never stopped, loving I've said in the past that, like, Middle Earth and sort of that Tolkien's work is kind of the lens through which I kind of view all stories.
Mm,
And it's not necessarily like this is the good lens and other ways of storytelling are bad. I'm just like, this is sort of the baseline from which I am working, you know?
yeah, yeah. I think there's something, I like that idea of like it's not that other, I think listening to you talk about other people in the way that they were kind of perceiving Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, you've got someone saying this isn't realistic. You've got someone saying like this is a bad thing for your personality. You've got
Yeah.
sort of all of that. And it sounds like the space that you came to was, it's not that what you like is dumb, it's just that this is what I like and I want to do something that is as good or better.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Would you say, I think like to me, The Lord of the Rings is this epic adventure, but in its core, it's about the people on the epic adventure and their relationship to each other.
Yeah.
Do you feel like those relationships and those friendships were something that struck out to you more, or was it the world that you were in and it sort of didn't matter about the story?
I think what I love about Tolkien is you can't separate one from the other.
Mm,
Um, the friendships matter immensely. They are as big as the world, but they are always in the context of that world, and the choices that people are making are always in sort of the context of this very, like, post-Edenic, world where magic is fading, and it is a story that is, I think, about death a lot. Um
mm,
which is, not to take away from the epic adventureness of it, but it's kind of, especially if you're coming to it young, I think is is a story that kind of treats, sort of the big inevitabilities of life, with a seriousness that at least American culture really wants to deny or not talk about. Um,
mm,
and it is, yeah, a story of friendship and sacrifice, and they you can't separate one from the other.
yeah. Ooh, really, that's good. I like that. um,
Yeah.
it's a good read. No,
Yeah, no, I
I,
mean, I think it's great, and it's also, I think, like, I come to this very chill, um, trying to emulate my man Tom Bombadil place of, this is a great story. It's kind of the lens through which I view things, but is not the end all and the be all because, like, let it not go unsaid, Tolkien incredibly problematic, as the story, like, You know, you have, like, your good, uh, paragon men of the West, that you call them the men of the Westernest, but there are the other ones that you don't like, that you call the Black Numenorians, and, like, can we talk about that, my friend? Um,
Why would you want
s
to?
yeah, no, why as an adult, like, I think it is useful to, like, really love something that is undeniably not perfect,
Mm.
and that this author can never be what I want him to be. Like,
Hmm.
he's such an old Englishman. He's such an Oxford Don, and I love him. I love that for him. Um, but I've never, like, since I've had any sort of social consciousness, been under the misapprehension that he is, like, um, good in the way we want to think of authors as good these
Mm.
days, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, do you feel like I mean, obviously, as a kid, you don't necessarily have that critical thinking, but whenever or I don't wanna say kids don't critically think, I just mean,
No,
like,
no, no.
you don't have necessarily well, you're not necessarily reading that context or being told that
Yeah,
that's something that you should be aware of, right?
absolutely not. Yeah.
When you did find it out, like, I like this idea that you have of sort of when you first read it, it's this perfect thing that everything we should all be obsessing over. And
Yeah.
now it sounds like as you realize that even people who make things are human, um, and unfortunately humans are not always great people. It's a nice way of
Humans are
putting it.
people. It's annoying that way.
Yeah. Yeah, it turns out humans
Turns out.
there's that quote in Good Omens, by Neil Gaiman that always or and Terry Pratchett, excuse me,
Yeah,
that always sticks out to me, which is that, humans are fundamentally human. Um,
yeah.
and it like, every time I read it, I'm like, "Ah, you're right." Like,
Yep,
it is the worst thing to find out about someone is that they're actually just a human being.
yeah.
But I like do you feel like kind of taking him off that pedestal, and also to some degree, it sounds like taking the work itself off of a pedestal.
You gotta.
Yeah.
You gotta. Um, and it's a work that I've talked about this before. Sam is absolutely the hero of the book,
Mm.
and is without him, the quest fails. But there's a reason that Frodo is, like, the ring bearer and is the sensitive, adventure, curious hobbit, who gets the ring and carries it as far as he does, which is that he is a hero, and he also fails, and is broken, and is not human, but a hobbit, you know? And I think there is something that is really beautiful about having a hero, who can be heroic and also just fail,
Yeah.
just fall short.
Yeah.
And if the work is doing that, it is inviting you to evaluate the work on those terms, you know?
Mm. Sort of a little Freudian?
Frodoian slip.
Frodoian, yeah.
Yeah.
Frodoian, I think that's yeah, you know what? That's what we're gonna go
Yeah,
with. I was
yeah.
almost there. Yeah, I think did you when you were reading or seeing the movie for the first time I guess seeing the movie would have been you've got the audio drama, and then you see the movie, and then you properly read the book.
And then I properly read the book, yeah.
Yeah, so did you find yourself connecting more to Frodo than Sam as that sort of flawed person?
No, I think that's come to me later in life.
Mm.
I've reevaluated Frodo. I was all in on Sam when I was reading the books for the first time. Really, I was all in on both Eowyn and Faramir
Ooh, okay.
because I love a nerd who reads, and Faramir is Tolkien's self-insert into the book,
Yeah.
of just, like, the one guy who's, like, sensitive and noble and refuses the ring, NBD.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't think
yeah.
so.
No, and I love Daewin too because she was, the woman who did the unwomanly things and wanted, to to be a hero just as much as the people around her were being forced to be, and then ends up happy in the end, ends up not being, like, punished for that,
Yeah.
the way lots of stories will do. So those were really the 2, um, that I gravitated towards, but also a lot of, Sam and a fair bit of Mary
Mm.
too, for the hobbits.
I love what you were talking about with sort of the woman who gets to do unwomanly things and not be punished for them, because
Yeah.
especially in fantasy,
Oh, yeah.
there is not a lot of that. Um,
It's slim pickings.
yeah, it's hard to find.
Like, shout out to the Mists of Avalon, but
Yeah.
otherwise, oof.
Otherwise, good luck. Um, I yeah, I'm curious, like, having a female character at that age that does get to do badass things and
Yeah.
not sort of fail for it, do you think that kind of changed something in yourself and your self-perception?
Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of an echo of my larger relationship with The Lord of the Rings, there's a little bit of sort of this thing that I like is the best thing, and all other definitions of femininity are bullshit. And I'm gonna judge you for watching Friends and wearing, tube tops.
Mm.
How dare? And, you should want to be badass. You know, was I coincidentally listening to some Avril Lavigne at the time? Perhaps, who can say? Um, but, like, I think liking Eowyn initially was part of my "I'm not like other girls" phase.
Mm.
Um, and I think, it was really important because I did not fit into, a lot of early aughts, or even mid-aughts fashion.
Mm.
When we decided I'm wearing a flannel shirt right now. When we decided that flannels were okay, I was overjoyed. Um, bring on the Taylor Swift Evermore aesthetic. This is where I've been living my entire life.
I was just thinking about your, like, I was envisioning you in, like, your flannel, like, surrounded by Limited Two girls, like, just,
A
like,
little bit,
sparkles
yeah.
and yeah.
And I was, like, a little too scared to go in Hot Topic, like, I didn't go
Mm.
full punk or full goth, but there's a lot of, like, Limited to action, and
Yeah,
a lot of Claire's action that I was just not a part of.
yeah. No butterfly clips for you.
No butterfly clips for me.
I think I think the not like other girls phase doesn't get talked about enough, which
Yeah.
is I to me, what I think is really interesting about it is, like, once you get to I mean, hopefully, I don't think everybody gets to this, but, like, as an adult, you can get past it. You can get into this
Yeah.
thing where it's like, "No, like, I do wanna be like other girls. Other girls are cool." Like, it's not,
Girls are
um
great, actually.
yeah, actually, women are amazing, and I wanna like, there's no need to be cooler than other women, um,
Exactly.
but when you're a teenager and I think some of it comes from this desire sometimes I think the not like other girls phase comes from the outcast side of it. Like, well, if you're a
Mhm.
popular girl, you don't have a problem being like other girls because it worked out for you.
Yeah.
Like, if you are a limited to girl at that time or, like, you are working through Claire's and, like, you can rock the low-rise jeans and the Lizzie McGuire fit, fine, you do wanna be like
Yeah.
other girls. But sometimes it feels like the people who have a not like other girls phase and very intensely connect to something else already have been sort of kicked out of the clique of being with the other girls.
Or just don't feel comfortable breaking in. I think there's a lot of fear of ultimately, I think people who are like, there's one of my favorite gags in 30 Rock is, like, there's, a Liz Lemon high school reunion episode, and she has this sense of herself as being this persecuted nerd. Um, and it's revealed over the course that, like, other people were fine, she was just a little mean because she was off-putting. Um,
Yeah,
and, I don't necessarily think I was Liz Lemon bad, but there's a little bit of, like, the other girls are fine, they're nice. You shouldn't be scared to hang out with them, but
yeah,
there is something, like, this scarcity mindset that we have, as we are sort of defining ourselves, especially in, like, the strictures of school.
yeah,
Um of I need to have an identity because if I don't, then I'm nobody, and there's nothing more terrifying than that.
yeah, yeah. I think there's there's such a need for what stands out about me,
Yeah.
and if what stands out about me is not what stands out about everyone else, then I've gotta really lean into this
Yeah.
other thing, and be something different.
To switch over, it's the Game of Thrones Tyrion thing of you have to wear it like armor.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
um, which I do think, like, there's something really cool in girls being able to have fantasy sometimes for
Yeah.
that, because, like, what's more sort of armor-esque than literally armor? Like
Than wearing armor. Yeah.
yeah,
Than killing demons. Nothing is
yeah,
better. Yeah.
nothing better at all, man.
Exactly.
Um, I did you do any sort of, like did you grow up doing cosplay
Oh
or
god,
anything like that?
no.
No?
I I have, like, 0 manual dexterity. I can't like, they tried to teach us how to knit early in elementary school, and I was very bad at it. Like, I'm not crafty in that way. I really wanted to go to conventions, but I couldn't, like, honestly, until after college.
Couldn't, like you just were nervous to go or,
Oh, no,
like
just, like, I didn't, have the opportunity,
got it.
to, like, buy a plane ticket and go to San Diego or whatever.
Very fair.
Um, so, yeah, I didn't go until, like, we went for, Wolf 359 to Dragon Con. That was my first convention,
Mhm.
and seeing all the amazing cosplay there, I was like, "This is incredible."
Yeah.
Um, but it was not something that I felt I had the skills for, and also kinda didn't want like, I don't get the same thing of or I don't have the same desire to try and, like, embody characters in that way.
Mhm.
I think it's very, very cool, but yeah.
Yeah, are you more so you're more of, like, "I want to analyze and know everything about this."
A little bit, yes. Please give me all of the panels.
Yeah.
Um, and, like, let me look at the amazing cosplay.
Yeah, I think something I would love to talk about because I think it's, interesting listening to you talk about how you got hooked on certain elements of this, and then
Mhm,
seeing how I guess I know a little bit more about you than our average listener may, but seeing how it connects to your like, life now is really cool. So did you find after connecting with this radio drama from the BBC that you
mhm.
wanted more audio in your life, or did they do the other books? Did you get connected
No, I
in
mean,
that
they did
way?
the whole trilogy, so they
Yeah.
did, and there's a great, audiobook version of The Hobbit, and it's hilarious because I think that, like, I've been very connected to audio storytelling throughout my life without realizing that I was, 'cause my obsessions were on film,
Mm,
and television, and books before that. Like, this was always just, like, a supplemental thing that I liked and didn't think too much about.
yeah.
But, like, when Lost came out, I remember I devoured the, like, podcast that Damon Lindelof and Carlton Cuse put out for that. Um, I listened to like, a lot of my understanding of television filmmaking came out of listening to the Ron Moore's Battlestar Galactica podcast
Mm,
that he would put out every week. So I was, like, actively listening to a lot of audio, and I also, like, I had a tiny Orson Welles phase, and I listened to War of the Worlds and a bunch of, like, the Mercury Players stuff.
yeah.
I was, like, aware of Suspense and some of the, like, great old, radio dramas, but, like, just, like, never took it seriously in my own mind until a friend of my a very dear friend of mine, was like, "Hey, I think I came up with a radio show. Do you wanna read it?"
Yeah, and then kind of even more connected to that as well, you mentioned, like, your role-playing writing turns into the way you
Mhm.
collaborate now and the way you write now. Did you find yourself, like, maybe not making the connection ultimately, like, when it happened, but that same sort of thirst for collaboration and storytelling coming right back out of you?
Yeah, and it was something that, like, I had put aside and was like, "Well, I'm writing" all through high school and college, I was writing short stories, and eventually, like, reading every film script I could get my hands on, and thinking about screenwriting, and when I started working on Wolf 359, and, we're passing drafts back and forth with, the wonderful Gabriella Urbina, and eventually Zach Valenti and the great Emma Sherr-Zarco too. She wrote some phenomenal scripts for that show. I yeah, it was an echo of an experience that I had almost forgotten
Yeah.
about, and just was really, really great to get back to.
Yeah, I love how sometimes you can look back on it and see, like, "Oh, I thought it was just that I love this thing," but actually, like, it awoken little parts of myself, and
Mhm.
now those are fully realized
Yeah.
as a human being outside of outside of Middle Earth.
It's
Yeah,
wild.
yeah,
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah.
I think also, something that I am curious about, because we touched on this a little
Mhm.
bit, um, is The Lord of the Rings is back. We're making new stuff.
Sure is.
Uh, how do you feel about a prequel? Because I think prequels in general are something that people have strong feelings about.
Yeah. I mean, it's actually, my pals and I over at No Bad Ideas, where you have been a wonderful guest,
Yes.
did a whole, like, episode where we broke the format of the show and just talked about, like, prequels because we've been thinking so much about, this Rings of Power show and the problem of prequels and telling a story where you already kinda know the end.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it can be done well, and I have been cautiously optimistic watching the new show.
Mhm.
Boy, was I scared.
Yeah.
Boy, was like, "This is hard, and very easy to get wrong, and nothing I am seeing from this marketing is reassuring me," until
Yeah.
the actual show came out. So I'm happy to have it, and I'm happy to have it specifically as a corrective to a lot of, like, very gritty, cynical anti-hero storytelling, which I also love, but has kind of been the mode for, like, the last decade on television. Um, and having something that is, just sort of genuinely sincere. I hope it's more complicated than
Mhm.
the films are. And having a large cast hopefully will allow them to have, you know, not all of the nice characters end up on the good team.
Mm.
Not all of the, shady characters end up on team evil. Like, I hope we have people making good choices for the wrong reasons and bad choices for the exact right reasons and, treat the world of the Second Age, with a little bit more complexity than just elves v orcs. But we'll see. So I'm always happy to have it back. I think it's being made with a lot of love. I'm also, like, not I didn't revert back to, like, that fan state. I'm not there yet.
Mm. Okay. It's not hooked enough for you yet to
Yeah.
really be back in obsession
I
mode.
think I'm still too scared. I'm like, just show me that you're unambiguously as good."
Yeah, I think I would say as we're recording this, there's only 2 episodes out. It's not at this point where,
Yeah.
you can make a judgment call yet.
And it's a hard this is a separate rant, but, like, it's a hard thing to do on television the way that they
Mm.
are doing it. They are basically putting out, like, 8 hours of content separated into chapters, but it's not quite a TV show. I think
Yeah.
the pace of it and the storytelling priorities are more film-based. Like, I think they've basically made a trilogy. Um,
Yeah.
and we're, like, halfway through the first film right now.
Yeah. I would agree with you, because I think the pacing of the first episode feels like the pacing of a first act of a movie,
Yeah.
which is hard for a TV show, because you're expecting the first act of a TV show, which means I should be hooked after 15, 20 minutes.
And there's a part of me that's just like, "Stop late stage capitalizing the story because you gave these poor people, like, not the budget of 3 movies, even though they had
Huge
the
budget.
largest budget for TV, but it's like, it's not the budget for the Marvel movies that you're expecting, and they're gonna have to do this because TV schedules are insane. Like, they're gonna have to do this in a fourth of the time. Stop it." But
Yeah.
just make movies if you wanna make movies. Let
Yeah,
TV
if you
be
want new movies, make
TV.
new movies. Yeah,
But yeah,
that's a whole other rant that I could
that's a
go
whole
on
other
for
thing.
a
We could
while.
yeah, that's a different podcast.
Yeah, let TV be TV from Marissa and Sarah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
boy.
I think something that is interesting about it is, like, it does have these watching I've only watched the first episode at this point, but I
Mhm.
think the it has these elements that make you go, "Ooh, I wanna watch Lord of the Rings again." Like, I don't know that I've
Yeah.
gotten to the point where it makes me go, "Ooh, I wanna see the next episode," but it does make me go, "Ooh, man, remember that movie?
It
That
was
movie
really
was
good.
so good."
Emily St. James has this thing about how, in the first season of any television show, the writing and the story doesn't necessarily need to be all the way figured out if, like, the
Mhm.
other elements are really working. If, like, the actors pop, and the production design is good, and, like, there's an interesting score, and that's kind of where I am with this. I'm like, "This hasn't quite clicked for me, but there are enough elements here that I'm enjoying. I am gonna listen to the Bear McCreary score on repeat for maybe ever, that I'll stick with you guys," is kinda where I'm at with it.
I think that's fair. I think something that has come up with this show coming out is that a fandom that existed pre-Twitter now has Twitter.
Oh, yeah, and it's bad.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm curious about your feelings about seeing maybe a fandom that you have positive feelings or positive memories about turn into, I guess, I suppose for context for anyone who is not as chronically online as we may be,
Yeah.
is that abuse has gotten so bad from the fans towards the non-white actors on the show that the actual actors of Lord of the Rings have now of Lord of the Rings Ring of Power have now come out and made a statement, against racism and abuse, for their co-stars.
It's wild to me that s networks and series I mean, I can't speak to what Amazon has and has not done to prep these actors. I know that in the past, uh, non-white actors on stuff like Star Wars and the Marvel and the superhero movies more generally have kinda been left in the wind to weather a lot of abuse, so I'm very
Mm,
glad that the cast was like, "No.
yeah.
No shenanigans." And, like, the original the 4 Hobbits, Don Monahan and Billy Boyd and Elijah Wood and Sean Astin also came out and was like, "Stop this." So that's good. I think the internet like, I'm not really super in fandom anymore, and I think that's partly a function of I'm older and I have less time on my hands to be in fandom. I gotta do my laundry, I'm sorry. Um, but also, like, fandom with Twitter and fandom with, uh with kind of the media environment that we have right now is not as appealing to me.
Mm,
And there's something very interesting about the Tolkien fandom because you've got folks who grew up with the movies, and you also have much older folks in it too.
yeah,
And I think the majority of all of us are like, "Stop, you idiots, you trolls." Um,
yeah.
Leave people alone. Just don't watch the show. You weren't gonna anyway.
Yeah, that's always something I'm fascinated by is it's almost like you're watching purely to complain.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm not sure like, it's done in such incredible bad faith is the thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, we'll have, like, a separate podcast about the Snyder Cut and, like, what fans expect and the relationship between fandom, and industry another time. It's a whole other topic.
Yeah,
But I've been heartened by, like, the pushback from that, and also a little bit like, this is a teachable moment. Like, guys, they're not crazy. The
mhm.
if you look at the books, like, they're flawed, and this is a moment to say that and say, "We are taking the spirit of these, and what's important about them and applying them to our own times," and that's okay. That's good, in fact.
Yeah, it was interesting listening to you talk about kind of the things that you have now, as an adult, looked back on and said, "These parts of the original material that I fell in love with are flawed," and it seems to be the same flaws that the sort of divide on this new show are coming down on is, well, we wanna keep it exactly as it was before, including the parts that aren't okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and in fact, specifically those because,
Yeah.
yeah, it's it's done in such bad faith. I can't, um but yes, it's like we want our all-white power fantasy. please
Mhm.
and thank you. And that's never been entirely what the books are, but it's something that the books make it very easy to facilitate, if that's what you want, if you're going
Mm.
into them for that.
Yeah, I do think the positive of it, though, is it seems like the parts of Lord of the Rings that are great, which are these epic fantasy moments of people coming together,
Yeah.
supporting each other in the greater good. It seems like that's also the other side of what's coming up with this, which is you
Yes.
have sort of people who don't realize they're on the wrong side, saying, "No, don't do this. We want everything to be exactly the way we left it." And sort of the other side of people who made the show, people who made the movies, as you said, the original Hobbits coming out, the that side of the fandom coming out and saying, actually, no, like, adventures are for everyone, we're doing this together, and it is just interesting to see the sides of it where it's like both of you are pulling from the source material, just some of you are pulling good things and some of you are pulling negative things.
Yes, exactly. And it's like, why are you pulling what you're pulling? Because I think, I'm obviously biased. I think we're all also right. That that pulling sort of that sense of community and friendship and coming together to fight a larger struggle, and also that like our individual choices and our choices to connect to other people matter even in the face of like epic, incredible things that we can't necessarily fix on our own, but our individual choices matter. I think all of that is pulling the true spirit of the books, and I think the folks who are mad about casting are pulling an aesthetic. And
Mm,
they're pulling things that are not fully articulated in the books, nor historically true. Like, I hate to break it to you guys, like, North Africa is right next to Europe. People were
yeah.
all over the place.
Oh, no.
Have you heard of
Oh,
Spain? Like
yeah. Yeah. It truly is wild where
Yeah,
you're sort of looking at it, and it is one of those things where it's like if everyone takes a minute, we
yeah,
can all just look at the actual
right,
facts.
right.
Um, yeah, I do think it's cool though to see the positive side of it. I thought the
Yeah,
statement was a really big deal. I thought
I really liked the statement too. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So I think it is really cool to see, I think, fandom and industry evolving because I
Yes.
think a couple years ago it never would have been addressed.
No, it would the industry would have been too scared to address it. And I think especially, we all are in the bank. Amazon wants all of our money.
Yeah.
But the fact that they're having these actors backs is really important because I think, the online dogpiling can be a horrific experience. And the fact that hopefully these folks feel supported and protected is important.
Yeah. Something I am curious about too is one of the things you mentioned is the first time you got to go to a Comic Con was something that had to do with a fandom that you helped create.
Yeah.
And so as someone who has been shaped by fandom to now make something that is shaping its own fandom, I'm really curious about how it feels to be on the flip side.
Oh man, it's wild. Yeah, it's fascinating. I have so much more sympathy for creators, and specifically for creators who try to be online a lot,
Mhm.
and engage, with fandom because it is the most rewarding thing, but it's also really tricky.
Yeah.
I think, like, it is also, like, just the most humbling thing, to just be you're making spent a lot of time on that picture. You didn't have to spend that much time drawing the characters from this
Mhm.
thing. Uh, you are you cosplaying? That you didn't you had to buy that makeup. Why? Like,
Yeah.
so it's very, very cool. But I think, I certainly found over the course of making Wolf 359 that, like, the thing about it is you can experience it just like I blown away that there are people who got tattoos of, like, words that I wrote that are on their body. Like,
Mhm.
I don't know what to do with that. Um, but I think, like, the initial period where we were on Tumblr a lot, um we found, or I found at least, that, like, I couldn't keep doing that, especially once the show was over, 'cause I was like, "It belongs to you guys. It's yours." Like, I got to make it, and that's really cool. But now the conversation that's happening is one that doesn't need my voice in it.
Mm,
And so it's like I think it's like cooking a great meal.
mhm,
Like, it's like making a Thanksgiving dinner and having everybody come over, and, like, you get to eat a little bit of it, and that's fine, and good, but really it's about seeing everybody else get to enjoy the meal is, I
mm.
think, the essence of the creator experience.
I really love that metaphor. There's something really nice about it, and also I like the idea that at a certain point you have to let everyone enjoy their own plate,
Yeah,
without trying to sort of add more to it. You've already made it, and now it's time for everyone to sort of find their footing
exactly.
in it.
And it's been interesting because I think especially for Wolf 359, we've had lots of people, uh, come up to us and be like, "What happens after the ending? Would you do sequels? Would you do prequels?" And we're like, "No. We
Mhm.
we made it. It's yours now."
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I also, fun fact, have seen one of those tattoos in real life,
Oh, man.
um, which is pretty cool, I think. I actually think I saw it before I met you because it would have been, it was at the Austin Film Festival, and
Oh,
it must
sure.
have been the first time I met Gabrielle, and we met someone who had had a Wolf 359 tattoo, and I believe it was a line you personally wrote
I
because
think I
I
know this person because I think they've sent me a picture of the tattoo.
sent you a
Yeah.
picture of the tattoo.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, what a cool thing, that is just indescribable. What a feeling.
I don't know, what do you I'm curious, Marissa, what you think as someone who creates, and are you able to, like, be in your own fandoms? How has it changed your experience of being in other fandoms?
Yeah, I think for me, it's been interesting because I think the stuff that I started out with was so personal in such a way that I don't know that
Mm,
I necessarily thought I would start out or maybe ever put out there.
right.
Because I love big genre stuff. I love superheroes. I love that kind of stuff. And so with the genre, I think you can kind of hide your personal parts of it in a way that doesn't feel so specifically seen. Um, but I turned around and was like, let me write something about anxiety.
Yeah.
And panic attacks. And I think that part is hard for me to that piece in particular is hard for me to engage directly with fandom because it feels so personal that, like, even if it's a positive reaction, it could be I could read it wrong or
Right.
that's hard, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Um, and I did make the mistake of reading some of it, and I think it wasn't even a negative, it was just that certain people connect with certain characters, and they wanted to see more of those characters, and then you're like, "Well, but their story is that's not the story that I'm telling," and you start to just really obsess over it. So certain things I can't,
Yeah.
be involved with, but I do really love and get overwhelmed by the experience when someone says this changed something or helped me talk about something that was just as personal. And those moments I think are just moments that I wouldn't trade for the world, like actually getting to have that.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's really beautiful. It's been interesting with like the parts, kind of doing like that vampire show, for example,
Yeah.
which is all about fandom and all about that relationship, and seeing it. But yeah, I do think it's hard because I think by nature fandom is gonna obsess over certain characters and get aggressive about other characters, and it's always gonna hurt when they're upset about certain characters because as a writer, every character has a little part of you that you do feel really passionate about, and
Yeah.
so, people have been understandably, he's set up as the villain, but, like, people have feelings about Warren, and it's hard for me to read them knowing how everything plays out, and knowing that I'm like, "Yeah, but you just don't know yet." Like,
Yeah, just wait. But
"Just
I
wait, I
promise.
promise."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and so, like, I think it's amazing, and I'm so happy that it exists, and I, of course, like, can't keep myself from going to go check and see how people are
Mhm.
responding and all of that, but it is hard. Like, it's a balance of I can't respond to most of it. That's what I'll say. I can
Yeah.
read it and pretend I never read it, but I can't reply.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and then I think I like the idea that I do think, like, it does change how interact with things as a fan for sure, because when I say certain things, I'm like, "Ooh, that's gonna hurt if someone finds it and reads it." Um, and so I do think I keep a lot more of it sort of I in personal circles as
No, yeah,
opposed to the
God bless
internet.
group chats because that's where
Yeah,
that stuff belongs.
right. It's
Yeah.
like I'm still gonna say it, I'm just not
Yeah,
gonna say it where someone can read it.
exactly, exactly. And
Um,
there's a part of
yeah.
fandom that is that, like, I just
Yeah.
can't do anymore.
Yeah, there's just such a I think unfortunately there is like a part of fandom that is just being negative about it. And sometimes it's rightfully so. Like sometimes you did mess up your story and
Yep.
people have the right to tear it apart. It's just hard to to deal with
Yeah,
it.
and I think, like, it's also part of analysis too, is just being like I think, that negativity isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think it sometimes makes you smarter about storytelling. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, just have fun, kids. Can't do it anymore. I'm out.
No, that's so fair. Yeah, I think it's interesting listening to you kind of talk about your journey with fandom because it feels like fandom was there for you when you needed it,
Yeah.
and now you can sort of take all of the things that you've learned and turned and changed about you as a person and just move forward in what you're looking for. I wouldn't say it doesn't sound like you're completely not engaging in fandom whatsoever,
Oh,
but
no.
it's a much more personal relationship now.
Yeah, and I feel very similar about fandom the way I feel about, like, internet friends.
Mm,
Like, when I first got on Twitter, as much as it's a hell app, I made a lot of really great friends who I have now gotten to meet in real life and are just like my friends now. Um,
yeah.
and once that happens, I don't need Twitter for that in a way that I did when I first got on it, you know?
Mhm.
I feel
Yeah.
like people have that experience with Tumblr a lot too, of like you make a lot of really good friends and then you're not necessarily like seeking that in the same way once you have sort of a circle, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, where it's like you've sort of found it and so now you can it's filled the hole. Like it helped you bridge that hole that you were
Exactly.
looking to plug,
Exactly.
so to speak.
Yeah.
I love that. Um I think that is like a very beautiful place to maybe wrap up. So I'm gonna ask you our final question that I ask everyone. Um, if you had never, ever been
Mm.
handed The Hobbit in the 3rd and 4th grade,
Yeah.
what would be different about you today?
Um, it's a good question. It's the kind of thing where the coward's answer is I'm like, "Well, I always would've found it because it's,
Mm.
like, the center of the Venn diagram of my interests." I think if I had never read it, or it didn't exist, I would've gravitated a lot more towards, like, medieval history maybe,
Mhm.
and Arthuriana, and I might, um instead of having gone, like, the writer route, there was a period of my life where I really wanted to work in a museum, and I feel like I may have that
Ooh.
that version of me might be the one that exists, um, where I can just tell you a lot about, coins of the late Roman Empire and stuff.
So I think it sounds like you would have maybe connected more to the stuff that perhaps inspires fantasy in the first place.
Yeah, I think I probably would have found more of an escape in the past than in fiction.
Yeah.
But I think that that trajectory, whatever form it took, was always there.
Yeah. Well, I am glad that sort of warts and all you found Lord of the Rings because I think being a writer has worked out quite well for
Oh,
you
it's
and
worked out real good. I'm
yeah.
very pleased.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel and it's worked out for those of us who get to enjoy your work. So
Aw,
it's worked out for me personally.
excellent.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing so much and I've really enjoyed hanging out with you today. So
Oh my
thanks for joining
gosh.
me.
Thank you so much again for having me. I obviously don't have a ton to say about The Lord of the Rings and couldn't talk
No,
about
not
it
at all.
for hours.
Yeah.
So this has just been a delight.
I have very much enjoyed myself. Well, thank you so much again to Sarah for joining me and for talking about her experience with Lord of the Rings and what that's meant to her. If you enjoyed this episode, I think you will also enjoy an episode we did earlier this season with one of her collaborative partners that she mentioned in this one, Gabrielle Urbina. Gabrielle joined to talk about his relationship with Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and in that also talked a lot about how he came to meet Sarah and how they all came to work together. And I think it's really interesting that fandom played a part in both of their journeys that ended up in the same place ultimately, where they started working together. So if you're interested in listening to that, you can find it right here wherever you're listening to this podcast. It's episode 4, Buffy the Vampire Slayer with Gabrielle Urbina. We will be back next Wednesday with Christian Jacqueminton, who is a scientist and a PhD candidate at UCLA, someone I am personally very proud of, and we'll be talking about her relationship with Star Trek. You'll get a little glimpse into who I used to be as a person in that episode, because we have known each other for a very long time. If you'd like to hang out with me between now and then, or just let me know what you thought about this episode, you can find me on all social media at Marissa Kamari. You can also subscribe to my newsletter, which I release an issue of every week with this podcast, by visiting our website, tandonproductions.com. Until next Wednesday, I hope you are enjoying what you love.